In Princeton lebt und arbeitet der amerikanische Schriftsteller Jeffrey Eugenides. Sein jüngster Roman, Die Liebeshandlung, erzählt von einer jungen Frau an einem nordamerikanischen College zu Beginn der 80er Jahre. Eugenides, zu dessen bisher erschienenen Romanen die Selbstmordschwestern und der Pulitzerpreisgewinner Middlesex zählen, arbeitete 7 Jahre lang an dem neuen Roman, im Original unter dem Titel The Marriage Plot erschienen. In dem Buch findet sich die Protagonistin hin und her gerissen zwischen dem wachsenden Einfluss der französischen Dekonstruktivisten und ihrer Liebe zum viktorianischen Roman andererseits. Eugenides' neues Buch zeigt die Spielarten der Liebe, eine dramatische Dreiecksgeschichte auf eine ganz und gar neue Art und furios erzählt.
I think writers tend to be a little bit anxious when their books are coming out. You know, you finish the book, and then you do the editing and everything, and then there's this kind of few months of quiet. And unless you have nerves of steel, you probably will be a little bit anxious during that period. Yes, I was writing another book. Entirely, it was about a family that had a big debutante party, and I had started it actually while I was writing Middlesex. I put Middlesex away for a little while, which I sometimes do, to get perspective on what I'm working on, and I worked on this other novel. And then when Middlesex was done, I went back to that novel and worked on it for a couple of years. And one of the characters in this novel was called Madeleine, and she was one of the daughters in this family. And she was coming home, and I started to write her story, what was going on in her life, kind of a backstory. And she was in college, had some romantic problems, and she was taking a lot of semiotics course and reading Derrida and Roland Barthes. And as I wrote about her, I kept writing about her. It became much too long to fit in the novel I was working on. And I realized that the tone of the novel and some of its concerns were really extraneous to the novel that I was working on. So what I had in my hand was 2 different books, I realized, and I had to surgically separate them and hope that I could keep both of them alive, and I just pursued the marriage plot. I've been thinking and feeling sorry for myself in general about the fact that marriage, the great subject of the novel, was really no longer available to the contemporary writer anymore. I mean, if you think about what the novel is and the history of the novel, it usually has been about marriage in one form or another. With the earliest books, like Jane Austen's novels, it's about a woman and who is she going to marry, and there's a number of different suitors. And then as the 19th century proceeds, you get kind of deeper, darker books about marriage, like the books of Henry James, where a woman, much of the plot will be about who she's going to marry, but then the novel will continue into her marriage, and you'll see, the repercussions of her, usually her wrong choice. Or Anna, you could look at Anna Karenina, and see how important the marriage is to that novel, and the fact that she gets divorced and all the problems that ensue in her life, and really leads to her suicide. Well, she was reading the semiotics. I little by little developed her interest in Victorian literature and the conflict between her love of 19th century fiction and her desire to sort of get with it and get hip with deconstructive theory. A young woman, in college in the 80s, encountering French theory and deconstructive theory, all of which tends to call into question the eternal verities of the emotions and certainly the kind of romantic illusions that she has. So she's encountering this at the same time as she's really full of romantic illusions. So it was that predicament, her love problems and what's going on with her education, is what intrigued me about it. But it still affects a lot of our behavior in who we choose to fall in love with, how we fall in love, and it can mess up our lives just as much. So I finally did find a way to write a book that is a marriage plot, but also is not a marriage plot. So the novel obviously has lots of precursors. I was thinking of Henry James and Jane Austen, but maybe Cervantes is in there as well. It's a little bit sad, yes. Well, we don't want to give the ending away, but no. It's I like an ending that has a number of different notes in it, like a good wine. So it's got some charm to it, some slight humor, a fair dose of melancholy, I think, at the end. Most of all, I think it's the satisfactory ending for how you would write a modern marriage plot, especially with these three characters. I actually think I'm a realist, and I've always been a realist in my books, despite certain atmosphere of I don't know, of a little fantastic atmosphere in some of my books. Nothing ever happens that couldn't happen in reality, but this book is much more realistic in terms of the scene by scene play of the book. But even in a book like this, when you're trying to describe someone going mad, or even someone falling in love, you find that you're called on to come up with solutions that feel just as experimental as when you're writing a book that is perhaps less traditional on the surface. So I don't know. I don't look for sanity in my characters. I look for passion and intelligence. I think they're all fairly sane in a way, and I'll be in Berlin, Hamburg, Frankfurt, and maybe Stuttgart, I think, in November. So I'm looking forward to that. Mm-hmm. I always like touring in Germany. The audiences there and the readers there are so great that it's one of my favorite place to go.